Socialism is bad. Communism is worse. Stalinist style Bolshevism is a total nightmare.
Viva Stalin! Vive notre Stalin! Slava Armate Russe! Long live Stalin!
Under Stalin, you're either outright killed or your mind gets crippled. These are not very good choices. In a totalitarian dictatorship, freedom doesn't exist. Big Brother controls everything, and his tentacles even reach into people's private lives. People become paranoid and delusional, lifeless, hollow shells. The occupying Russian forces installed a puppet regime in Hungary that started to Sovietize the country at breakneck speed. Brutal Stalinist social engineering was coupled with relentless and bizarre propaganda that amounted to brainwashing. I guess the Russians are more prone to accept that life is suffering. The Hungarians are a little bit feistier. To push this Bolshevik garbage on Hungarians, I don't know. I don't know what they were thinking. The Catch Committee boys faced a choice. Do we want to have a life or we don't want to have a life? And during the darkest decade, they all embraced life. They stayed true to their character. They had a lot of fun. They all got married and started their own families. But most importantly, they were impervious to brainwashing. In this episode, instead of fully rounded stories, I'd like to share with you anecdotal fragments from my father's life. These anecdotals illustrate how somebody becomes a winner even when life deals him a really bad hand. Next to the school building, there was a cooper workshop owned by a crusty old guy who was infamous for his ill temper and harsh treatment of the lazy apprentices. 15-year-old Mishuka was sent there to learn the tricks of the trade. I don't think he was intimidated by this mean guy, and his attitude was right. He was used to the hard work, and he was eager to get ahead in life. My sister and I looked at his elementary school report cards, and they weren't the best, but his work, his technical drawings, his geometry assignments from trade school were top-notch, very precisely done. So I guess he discovered his talent, like he's good with his hands, and he was also motivated to learn the theory of the trade. He rose through the ranks very fast, and in 3 years he had his trade certificate. He was good to go. He moved to Budapest to join his older brothers. Uncle Sanyi, Uncle Pista, Uncle Lajos were already there, and they shared a rented apartment. He got a job in the country's biggest barrel factory. And how should I put it? Their social calendar was full. They weren't exactly shy or reserved when it came to dating. And, these were the darkest days of Stalinism. He just hinted at some of the escapades they had, and he held back on the raunchier details. But I have to tell you, he didn't miss out on anything. They had a lot of fun. Mishuka's call-up card came to join the Hungarian People's Army. It was a 3-year mandatory service. The Soviets completely reorganized and refashioned the Hungarian army. The soldiers actually looked like Red Army soldiers. In the early Cold War hysteria, boot camp was as bad as it gets, and the poor soldiers had to put up with heavy daily doses of communist indoctrination. He witnessed Stalinist atrocities against civilians who were labeled the enemies of the people, and he was deeply disturbed. He admired the defiance, the attitude of his fellow soldiers who dared to show their contempt for the commissars. While he was on guard duty, he came very close to shooting a drunk petty officer who breached the perimeter fence. Lucky for him, his warning shot was enough. He didn't need to pull the trigger a second time. Eventually, not unlike the legendary Budai grandpa, he got himself a good army job. He went out on trucks to do grocery shopping for the regiment. I have his army calendar from 1952, and he circled the days when he was allowed to go home on short leaves. Mr. Popular was home on a regular basis. So I guess it was easy for him to make sure that his girlfriends at home wouldn't forget him. During the 1956 uprising, the Catch Committee boys kicked some communist butt, I'm sure, but because of the bloody Soviet crackdown and the reprisals, nobody asked questions as to who did what in 56. So the freedom fighters forever kept their secrets. In the early 60s, as the communists consolidated their power, they were forced to authorize the operation of small businesses simply because they couldn't produce enough consumer goods with Soviet methods. These small businesses were heavily taxed and strictly regulated, but still the backbreaking work promised a bit better future. My entrepreneurial father borrowed some money from Gulag survivor legend Uncle Mishuka, and with the money he bought a bandsaw, a joiner, and a few oak logs, and he started his own cooper business. He also bought 1932 Citroën Traction Avant, a black one, just like the Gestapo cars in Nazi-occupied France. He mounted a huge roof rack on it, and we loaded this car with barrels and we went to village fairs to sell them. He needed a few good years to go like this and establish himself, but unfortunately, right from the get-go, he was struck down by a mystery illness. Sometimes he would stagger out of the workshop, blue in the face, like literally blue in the face, and he would say, "I'm suffocating, I can't breathe." He got some primitive puffers, but the doctors needed 3 years to figure out that this wasn't some kind of asthma, this was a specific allergy to mulberry tree sawdust. While the doctors were doing their investigations, my poor father pushed himself and worked with this frightening condition. I think it was very scary for him. Early on, a doctor suggested that maybe you should go to the mountains. The mountaineer should do something good, and it did. This is how our family ended up going to the Matra Mountains, and Later on, even when his allergy was under control, we kept going back. It became a yearly pilgrimage. And it was a very special, formative experience for me, the boy from the plains, an early encounter with the mountains. My sister and I had a wonderful childhood. The country was stable for 2 decades, although increasingly bankrupt. The deal was this: don't challenge communist rule, and then you will be left alone. Or else. My father's hard work paid off. We lived in financial security, and because his barrels were of the highest quality, he became a well-known and well-respected master in his trade. I went to the Pirista High School and on to Teachers College, and in 1980, I visited my Uncle Frank in Canada. Now that was unheard of. A trip to Canada from behind the Iron Curtain. Anyways, we pulled it off. My sister became a draft technician and she got married. I graduated from Teachers College and I got a part-time position at the Pirista High School. And I also got my own trade certificate as a cooper. I got married and my parents got us an apartment very close to where they lived. My father's dream came true. 2 educated, well-settled kids who he can be proud of, and his son was working alongside him as a cooper. I planned to get my doctorate, and I also had wonderful ideas about completely modernizing the manufacturing process at the shop. We had a plan. Things looked fantastic. But it all came crashing down. I crossed the line. I publicly challenged communist rule, and Mommy and I got in trouble. We got blacklisted, and this eventually forced us to flee the country. My father supported us throughout our ordeal, but the bottom line is, once we were gone, for months, it felt for him that he lost a son. My sister's marriage fell apart, and the opportunistic ex-husband demanded the apartment because he knew that my father was complicit in our escape to the West. My parents' house was partly on my name, so they needed to pay somebody a huge amount of a bribe, to make sure that it doesn't get confiscated. I caused this disaster. Yet, my father knew that I did the right thing. Mishuka, Apu, was the Tati now. History separated us, but it wasn't acceptable for him. He became a frequent traveler. So much so that the Canadian embassy staff in Budapest recognized him because he showed up every year for his visa. He was driven by a strong sense of mission. He wanted to be there for us. He wanted to be there for his grandkids. He wanted to make sure that our family heritage is not lost, and he wanted to help us with whatever he could. He always arrived with a stuffed suitcase, gifts, legacy items, his artwork, and most importantly, smuggled sausages. The day after his arrival, he would jump into the work around the house, and what I figured would be work for 2 weeks, he usually gobbled it up in a couple of days, and then I had to find new work for him. He demanded it. He didn't want anything for himself. He wanted to serve us. He wanted to maximize his giving. Yeah, there's the famous ant incident. We stumbled on a nest of carpenter ants, and then we ended up stepping on hundreds of them. That was an experience. One Sunday afternoon, I was dying. I was so exhausted. I said to him, I'm going inside and put my head down for 10 minutes. He was just sitting on the edge of the deck, waiting for me to emerge, and then we would, resume the work. Mommy and I woke up to the sound of somebody working with sandpaper, and we looked out and we saw him killing ants with his bare foot, like rubbing them out on the pavers, because the ants dared to march towards the house. So he saved us from another invasion. By the end of his visit, he was dead tired. And he was ready to go home with wonderful experiences and stories that he would share with everybody. But no matter how hard he worked, he never forgot his number one priority: showing his love to Mayra and Marta. In the turbulent and often confusing years of post-communist Hungary, Tati became a political activist. He wasn't an educated ideologist, but he did his daily rounds around the city, checking on the progress of public projects, and he spontaneously talked to people. He had a unique perspective. This was his Canadian experience. He had an insight into how things work on the other side of the pond. He was a staunch Hungarian patriot, but he was determined to keep socialism in the waste bin of history. He encouraged people to take charge of their own destiny and participate in the democratic process. He confronted short-sighted stupidity. Once he came across a complainer, and this guy said, "Well, I didn't bring this shit on. I didn't go to vote." And then Tati said, "Oh, you didn't go to vote? Then shut up." He was 83. He was working in our backyard, pushing himself. It was a hot day, and his heart just couldn't keep up anymore. He lived with congestive heart failure for another 4 years, and even when he could barely walk, he continued to check on progress in his beloved city, and he continued to share his vision. He had a final gift for us. He showed us how to live, and then he showed us how to die with a smile, how to die with courage. He didn't want to be a burden. He didn't want to spook anybody, and he was as positive as he could manage. And even days before his death, he entertained my sister with his black humor. His final inspiration. A true Kecskeméti can laugh death in the face. As we continue to process and articulate Tati's legacy, Mayra said, I bet he would be surprised to see that he became a legend Well, as a human being, he accomplished his mission. He lives on in us.